Is the first principle of Islamic economics, or we call as the real owner. In the Quran, it is clearly mentioned that Allah has created all the creations, including wealth, on the earth and in the heavens. Hence, He is the real owner of all the resources such as land, water, air, and also creations such as flora and fauna in the world. Allah has mentioned in Al-Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah verses 284.
لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض.
The individual and collective ownership of human beings in the resources and wealth can be recognized by the sense that one should acquire the resources with his own personal effort and utilize them by deriving the utilities through economic activities. Yet, every human being has an equal right to utilize the natural resources created by Allah. More than 3 billion people live on less $2.5 a day, and an estimated 3.1 billion live in extreme poverty, making do with $1.25 or less daily. Can you imagine that? What is like to not have enough food for to eat and go to bed hungry at night? Poverty is still a big problem in the world today. As you can see from the numbers, this is in spite of the progress that you see around you. Based on these statistics, Malaysia's poverty rate is 2.7% under $5.5 per day. Poverty headcount ratio at $5.5 a day is the percentage of the population living on less than $5.5 per day at 2011 international price. Back in 2011, 165 million children were stunned due to malnutrition. Around 1 billion people welcomed the 21st century not knowing how to read and write. Inequality also have become an issue in our world today. Imagine that a poor person in an industrialized country will find it harder to interact within their society than a poor person in a poor country. The disparity will become obvious when there is a wider income gap between the rich and the poor. Due to this inequality, the instance of crime can increase when people find themselves looked down upon and disrespected. In this video, we will be analyzing our curiosity based on the ownership under the Islamic model related with our chosen SDG, which are
Poverty in general is a complex and multidimensional phenomenon that transcends monetary aspects and is linked to poor economies, weak human resources, and a weak provision of social services. From our master Umar ibn al-Khattab, God pleases him, he said, "I swear to God, if poverty were a man, I would have killed him," referring to the magnitude of the effects of poverty on man and on society as well. In another quote he says, "The sky does not rain gold or silver." Also, this is a reference to the importance of seeking work and not falling behind. Inadequate food and water. More than 800 million people around the world suffers from hunger, and more than 2 billion people lack access to safe drinking water in their homes, which make widespread hunger and water insecurity one of the main causes of widespread poverty. Lack of sufficient food means that people do not have the energy to do their jobs, which can lead to a loss of jobs, and lack of food and clean water, which may lead to disease. Wars and disasters. The flight of many families from their homeland due to the unstable political situation and the homes and jobs left behind by their members is a major cause of spread of poverty, especially among the displaced. The view is expanding to include countries suffering from civil wars which reduce their productivity and the national product, health, education and water. Poor education. The low level of education is one of the causes of poverty. While not all uneducated people suffers from poverty, but poor education is a major factor in reaching poverty, especially as education is a key gateway to employment in the world, and it also plays a role in obtaining greater economic resources that allow families to secure basic life requirements. Climate change. Natural disasters such as drought, floods, storms are having a greater impact on poor communities, especially as most of the world's poor rely on agriculture and fishing. So, in difficult climate change, millions of people lose their food reserve and became poorer, making it difficult for them to reach the state of contentment they once were. Unequal distribution of wealth. Sometimes inequality are evident, but in other cases they can be subtle. For example, the voices of certain people or groups may not be heard in community meetings, meaning that they do not get an opinion on important decisions. Regardless of the fact that these disparities means that affected people do not have the tools they need most to move forward. For already vulnerable families, this may mean the difference between being poor or living in extreme poverty. The clearest impact of the unequal distribution of wealth is the continued poverty felt most keenly by poorer parts of the world. These areas are locked into intermittent relation of gross inequality and having little options to move away from the political economy that determines how wealth is created and for whom. Poverty occurs when a small number of people own a great deal of wealth that does not total to zero number to the extent that not everyone is allowed to leave their wealth. Then the economy becomes in a situation where some people are in position to obtain food that can only be obtained from agricultural land but does not have any agricultural land. For this, they should lease farmland or buy food from those who do so. This is how poverty comes.
Land is a critical asset, especially for rural poor people, as it provides a means of livelihood through crop production and sale and other products. Property rights over housing provides shelter, dignity, and the means of accumulation for both rural and urban poor. Without property rights, the ability or even the authority to make investments in the land where they live or farm might lead to higher returns. In certain instances, land may be used as a collateral for credit in order to invest in the land, or exchange for capital in order to start another operation producing revenue. Landless people are excluded from these incentives, which is why they often rate among the poor. For example, data from South Asia, home to approximately 40% of the world's poor, show that poverty is strongly linked to landlessness and insecure access to land. The strong connections between poverty and tenure insecurity have prompted many land reforms. Redistributive land reforms that transfer land from large landlords to landless people, especially farm laborers. Long history above all the latter half of the 20th century, since redistributive land reforms have both economic and political costs of obtaining land for weak constitutional reforms to ensure greater protection of tenure on a land they already occupy. It may seem like the way to confer property right on the poor is relatively simpler. More than 90% of the rural population in Africa access land through a customary mechanism. Property rights have a fundamental role to play, not only in boosting economic productivity, but also in increasing the social status and integrity of those who own it. to strengthen rights of poor people to own property. Hence, it may make important contributions to poverty reduction. Not unexpectedly, the Commission for the Legal Empowerment of the Vulnerable after access to justice and rule of law proposed opportunity rights as the second element of legal empowerment. This is allowable as it calls for the property rights as part of a broader reform, including access to justice and the creation of a legal framework based on what operations and extra-legal structures that the poor employ. Access to justice would imply that systems are accessible to the poor and reduce concerns about the misuses of formalizations to take away their property. But if access to justice does not precede or accompany property rights formalizations, the formalization may create incentive for the elites to grab even stronger resources claims. Too regularly, property rights reform have imported formalization models which are not or have not been based on local realities, provided financial and human resources to provide decentralized systems guaranteeing full access for all. The outcome could make matters worse for the poor.
How Islamic concept of ownership related to Muslims today, and does ownership under the Islamic economic model promote equality? Economic activity also involves religion, Islamic ways and views on what is rightful and what is prohibited for the Muslims to do. All human actions, including economic activity, must be associated with Allah, and all human actions must be based on equality and justice. As a Muslim living in this diverse society, he should recognize the fact that all of his actions will affect the well-being of others too. The purpose of living in this world is not just to serve one's own needs and desires to attain individual benefits, but also achieving the harmonious life living in the community. Individual Muslims should give consideration to the needs and interests of the community in every economic activity such as consumption, production, and investment. He should also respect the interests of other people, other than pursuing his self-interest, and when there is a clash between the interests of the individual and interests of the society, the interests of the society should be given priority by it. Individuals and Islamic society should also set objectives to meet the basic needs of every member of the society, promote justice in the distribution of wealth and income among the people, and also focus on the stability of the state's economic growth. Nothing should be done in an excessive way in the activity of consumption and acquiring wealth, as it should hinder any actions that will affect the economic development of the country that will lead to wastage.
Ownership in Islamic economy model is more practical and realistic because it maintains the right of private ownership and allows the government to use available resources to help the poor and underprivileged. Islamic economy is humane and efficient and establishes a moral economic system for the good of the entire society. Accumulation of wealth or property is allowed where the rich can continue to be richer, but the poor must not be left behind, and they should also be given the chance to be supported to improve their place in the society. Islam compulsorily retains a share of produced wealth by paying zakat. Zakat or zakah, commonly known as wealth tax, is paid at 2.5% from the wealth of the individual. This collection of zakat will go to the needy and other charitable deeds, so this will spread the wealth to the community. This institution of zakat in Islam doesn't only mean to alleviate poverty, but also provide incentive for the poor to fully participate in the economy by investing the surplus wealth, so that everybody can get the right to wealth in a just manner. This ownership principles in Islam guarantees that everyone gets what is rightfully due to him from Allah, and this is unlike the capitalist system where only those who take part in the production process have the right to wealth. Other than paying for zakat, Muslims are also recommended to give sadaqah and voluntarily give some of their wealth as a waqf for social economic welfare. Waqf is a charitable donation, such as a donation of buildings, land, or other assets to a charitable trust with no intention of recovery, and it's similar but different from zakat is that they both exist to promote social equity and protect the society. Muslims see wealth as trusted property from God, to be disturbed in a lost way, and they are required to purify their wealth by spending a portion of their income on the poor. The completion of zakat was seen as one of the most meritocratic acts, particularly in helping to realize the Islam vision of creating a just and equal society.
How can the restriction on ownership rights can avoid the unlawful means? Firstly, restriction can be defined as an official rule that limits what we can do or limits the amount or size of something. It can also be said as synonym of control, regulation, rule, and restraint. Restrictions are made to minimize or prevent bad things from happening among the society. Thus, it is important to run the restriction on ownership rights, especially in avoiding the unlawful means from happening widely. The restriction on ownership rights can avoid unlawful means by controlling and giving a warning to people or public for not doing the forbidden things and anything which may lead to unlawful means. One of ways to do the restriction is by practicing and revealing the content of hudud to the public by the government. This is because the content of hudud was created to protect all human beings and control their actions. Besides, by doing this action, they can know more deeply about the ownership rights as an owner of any goods. Furthermore, by introducing the rules of hudud, they also will know with prohibitions of doing unlawful actions such as usury, gambling, trade in haram goods, cheating, stealing, bribery, and unlawfully taking others' property as it violates ownership rights. The regulation of hudud also contains the judgment and punishment for those who are guilty. For example, if someone who was caught stealing money or any goods, they will be punished by cutting their hands in front of the public as stated in the regulation of hudud. Then, people or society who are looking the punishment will be afraid to do any actions that may lead to the unlawful means. Other than that, the poor people will also not be oppressed by the usury as it is haram to practice and a severe punishment will be imposed. So, this will give a chance to poor people to find and seek all the sustenance fairly with other people in order to live a better life. Moreover, people can have and own their wealth without worrying that bad things will happen, as the regulation of hudud has been enforced and the poverty rates problem can be resolved. In a result, the rate of crime and unlawful actions can be decreased as the people were afraid of the punishment. Hence, by doing restriction with practicing the hudud on ownership rights, the problem of poverty and inequality among people or society can be resolved.
By revealing and exposing the immediate consequences of abusing ownership rights for unlawful purposes, people will start to fear being punished in this physical world. But all unlawful trade practices and abuse of ownership rights, such as bribery, stealing, and gambling, are strictly prohibited in Islam. So everyone will be judged accordingly in the afterlife. This will cause the people to not want to do such unlawful acts, as they will fear the punishments in this life and the next. Unlawful ownership rights abuse can also sometimes lead to more unlawful actions. There are many real-life cases for this. For example, there have been many cases where a person who practices gambling becomes a gambling addict in time. And because of this serious addiction, he ends up losing all his assets, money, and property. And this leads him to start stealing, which is another unlawful action and is haram. So as you can see, by committing one unlawful act, it can lead you to commit more unlawful acts in the future. This is why restricting or forbidding some ownership rights are very important, as they will stop you from committing more and more unlawful actions which will harm themselves and others. Furthermore, ownership rights or property rights in this case are very important, as mentioned before, to reduce poverty. Without access to land, the poor depend on employment from other farmers or non-farm income sources. They will then be food or job insecure. Because the landless are excluded from these opportunities, they are often among the poorest. Data has shown that poverty is strongly associated with landlessness and insecure access to land. By restricting ownership rights over such properties by big organizations or companies who are already secure and are only interested in self-profit or for political reasons, will result in less poverty, as it will give the poor more security in terms of housing, food, and possibly even more job opportunities. With this, we can come to a conclusion that restricting some ownership rights will avoid us from unlawful means and can even help reduce poverty.
To sum up, a fairer world is possible if governments across the globe take actions to build a new economy that measures what truly matters to the society rather than pursuing their goals on maximizing endless profit. One of the actions that can be taken by the government to lift the poor from their dependency on the distribution of zakat or by charity is through providing jobs for the jobless. Providing jobs for the needy and pay their salary based on their number of dependents, or at least according to the country's minimum amount of salary, regardless of their educational background, can live and reduce their dependence on the distribution of zakat or charity. Secondly, the government or authorized party should always create awareness among firms on how they can help the nations who are poverty or oppressed by inequality. By that, firms are aware of their role in hiring those needy in jobs and those who live in rural areas in order to reduce the rate of poverty and inequality in one's country. This can help those villagers or people who stay in rural areas to lift up their standard of living and nonetheless reduce the unemployment rate in their country. Next, to solve poverty worldwide, governments should always improve their nation's physical conditions and make them more competitive by giving them health care. Health is crucially important for people, especially for poor people. Their standard of living depends on their health. When a poor people becomes ill or injured, the entire household will lose income and high healthcare costs will be incurred. Therefore, governments should reduce the direct cost of care at the point of service, for example, through reducing user fees for the poor or expanding their health insurance. Besides that, bringing education to the extremely poor will reduce the rate of poverty and inequality. Not every person without an education is living in poverty, but most of the extremely poor do lack in basic education. Those living in poverty will likely keep their children out of school, resulting in their children to also inherit the way of living in poverty. By providing education, these groups can develop skills and abilities. A quality education also supports a child in developing their knowledge and communication skills. Education will help them to fight inequality among them too. Nevertheless, in order to reduce the inequality regardless of what matter, such as ethnic inequality, gender inequality, education inequality, or even income inequality, a firm must consist of both genders, all races, and religions. This is because different people vary in the way of thinking. Through this, firms can enjoy the varieties of work, ideas, and enhance their profit.